I may have had my mute button on, but good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get ready to start our session. If everyone could please mute their tablet or computer unless they're speaking. Andy has indicated that he will take questions. And Dr. Lattimore, we're ready. I'm going to start recording to the cloud, and Dr. Lattimore, we're ready for you.
Okay. Good afternoon, team across the country. Our title this afternoon is Positioning 4-H and Extension for Investment. Next slide. Just to give you an overview, we have two special guests this afternoon, which really will highlight some of the things that's going on in 4-H, and also just basically have a great discussion as it relates to 4-H at this time. Our first guest is Dr. Martha Bernadett. Dr. Bernadett is the president and CEO of Molina Foundation, and she is the eldest daughter of the late Dr. C. David Molina and the foundation and the founder of Molina Healthcare, Inc. Both Dr. David and Molina and his wife Mary were elementary school teachers, and I think most of us in Extension could relate to that one. Prior to Dr. Molina's return to medical school, Dr. Bernadett and her sibling were raised with a deep value for education. Now, as a family physician, Dr. Bernadett understands the importance of literacy and education in overcoming health disparity. As the principal investigator of a demonstration project funded by the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation Juntos program, she helped address the barriers to health access faced by those with limited English proficiency. In 2003, Dr. Bernadett started a program to provide books to children without access to books, to improve the literacy of children, and to help them overcome barriers to health care access, and also impact their long-term overall health status. Now, to address these important statuses in an ongoing and sustainable manner, Dr. Bernadett formed the Molina Foundation in the next year in 2004. Martha is a trustee of the National 4-H Council, and she and her husband, Fatino Bernadett, are recipient of the 4-H Distinguished Alumni Medallion. So we're glad to have you with us this afternoon, Martha. And thank you. And we have Andy Ferrin, who is the SVP, Chief Strategist Officer for the National 4-H Council. And at this point, our presentation will be followed. Well, we said conversation. Well, it will be followed by a conversation, but I think Andy would love for you if there's burning questions, as well as Martha, if there's burning question along the way. Please feel free to just join in and ask those questions so that we can have a very good dialogue this afternoon. So at this time, Martha or either Andy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lattimore. I'm sorry, that was a very long introduction, almost as long as Andy's presentation. But it is my great pleasure to be the liaison from the board to Cooperative Extension. And I have really enjoyed the past year and number of years attending the APLU and NEDA meetings. I came for 4-H, I stayed for Extension. And some people call me an Extension evangelist because I believe so deeply in what you do and what happens and what's accomplished as Extension, that it's really become part of my life's mission to see what I can do along the way to help Extension move more broadly, faster, get more funding in order to just amplify and scale all the wonderful things you do. And one of the most wonderful things is 4-H. I believe in 4-H and the power of youth. I believe that 4-H presents a unique opportunity for Cooperative Extension to increase development resources and to support Extension's growth objectives. Now, there are about 54 million school-aged youth, and only about 17 million of them are served by all youth development organizations combined. So there are millions of young people today without access to 4-H, to a 4-H experience. And Extension's 4-H programs are without equal. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I think it's important that you recognize that not everybody knows that. And we really need to raise the visibility of your impressive outcomes. Now more than ever, we need young leaders and the energy and optimism they provide. 4-H youth are worthy of our collective investment. And to that end, the National 4-H Council's board is committed to supporting Extension's growth objectives. The trustees are passionate and committed to bringing new resources to bear on Extension priorities. We are committed to working closely with Extension leadership and specifically the ECOP 4-H Leadership Committee to ensure that we are aligned and effective. We do what we do at the National Council to support you and your priorities out in Extension, because you're the ones who are right there up front with kids and families. So today, Andy is going to talk about a study, and this study is one example of how our efforts can enhance Extension's advocacy and resource development. Andy's going to present data and results from work that was initiated by the National 4-H Council that can be used by Extension to enhance development efforts both locally and regionally, not just nationally. So I'm going to hand it over to Andy now. And thank you for all that you do out in Extension. I look forward to getting to know more of you as the year progresses. I think I know about a third of you so far, and I'm very, very excited to continue. Andy?
Thank you, Martha. It's my great pleasure to be able to work with Martha on a regular basis because she does care deeply, and those are not just words. So I want to thank you, Martha, and your husband, Tino. Martha and Tino have just recently made a $3 million gift to National 4-H Council to support Extension's goals related to health equity. So just a tremendous supporter of our programs in every way. We wouldn't be here without you, Martha. Thank you so much. So let me just dive in, go to the slide 3. I've got, first of all, also thanks to Mark for this opportunity. It's really always my pleasure to have these kinds of great conversations with you all. So we've got some good stuff to talk about today. The genesis of this presentation as it is constructed is really, it really came out of a request by the Committee on Legislation and Policy for 4-H to come and kind of update that group on what's happening in 4-H, what are the assets of 4-H, how could 4-H be an asset in their work. And we were happy to do that, and in partnership with, of course, leadership at ECOP and ECOP 4-H. So I'm just gonna make sure that I see the chat here. Oh, there we go, got it. What we were trying to do is make the point, as Martha talked about, that 4-H, that youth, and more specifically 4-H youth, are a great investment. And so we had the opportunity to talk to a little bit of a varied group. They had mixed understanding of 4-H and what 4-H was doing. So we kind of started with a bit of an overview. So these facts and figures aren't new to you, but if you look at page 4, it kind of gives you an idea of how we go out to market and talk about 4-H, tell the story, both with our board and other investors and also new potential investors. So this slide shows you kind of the programmatic focus, gender, race and ethnicity, geographic, a variety of different measures of our diversity, and then of course the scale of our delivery, kind of simple and straight to the point. And on the next slide, we go to kind of our reach in relation to other youth development organizations, as well as the outcomes. Those outcomes and impact are from the Tufts study, the Tufts 10-year longitudinal study. So this is really a good way to kind of get people up to speed with today's 4-H. In fact, we put this data and these demographics in front of our board every time we meet, every quarter. It's always good to be reminded of the impressive impact and scale and scope of 4-H. So I also wanted to mention that I know that ECOP 4-H is now working on updating these numbers. Some of these numbers are a little bit old, to be frank. So they're pulling new enrollment numbers, and we're going to have some updates on that pretty soon. So the next slide shows kind of in a graphic form council's role in the system. This is both our strategic plan for the next 3 years, as well as a representation of our unique role in the system. So we are talking with donors and supporters and other influencers about the idea of economic opportunity. That's really what we've landed on for the why of 4-H growth. More young people with economic mobility, with health equity, all those sorts of things. So and it lines up pretty carefully with our unique mission, which is really to convene the system around important issues and priorities that the system has, to tell the 4-H story, and to create public-private partnerships. So you can see how what we're looking at over the next 3 years, we want to, in that convening, want to elevate 4-H's role in expanding economic mobility and economic opportunity in America. We're going to continue in our marketing work to engage that significant community of alums who have very, very positive views about 4-H and have significant outcomes of their own. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then, of course, broaden corporate and foundation support for 4-H outcomes in those areas specifically that are priorities for extension around the idea of workforce development, STEM, healthy living, citizenship, those sorts of things. So we're in lockstep there. What I like to say about our role is we essentially are Extension's agent in the marketplace. Our role is to support, as Martha said, and be an advocate and bring resources to enable growth within Extension. So any questions about those slides? I'm sure that's not new territory. So why don't we go forward and talk a little bit about some new research on alumni outcomes. And this is where we spent the most time with the group in San Diego. This is a new study. It's board funded. And I'll say before I start going through the slides, there's a lot of data in the slides, but this is, all this information will be available, is available, being distributed through the system by ECOP 4-H. So we're going to have a page on 4-H.org where we'll hang these slides as well as some collateral that you can use locally to leverage these research findings. So on the next slide, really our objective for this was to support the advocacy work that we've been doing. So it is, we're talking about what's the value of 4-H participation, what are the positive effects of 4-H experience on members' lives, throughout their lives, and in what ways are 4-H alums ideal citizens, ideal leaders, ideal employees, those sorts of things. So we expected and hope to see a significant positive difference between 4-H alumni and the general public. We went out, we surveyed approximately 6,000 alums and with a control group of non-alums. So we have a very high N, which will allow us, as we go forward, to slice and dice this a little bit, see if we can come up with some other interesting findings on a regional or even a state level. So as we go out and make some strong claims, the more data that we have, the stronger claim that we can make about 4-H. So that's really the idea here. So I'm gonna hit it at a high level, and I'm happy to take any questions. So I've got 3 big takeaways from the survey. And on slide 9, takeaway number 1 is that a 4-H experience correlates with success in life, plainly said. What you will see in the data is probably somewhere between 15 and 20 points positive separation between 4-H alums and non-alums. It's timely because just yesterday, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, along with NPR and Harvard, released a study on attitudes around the American dream, around people's confidence and levels of optimism, and it's fairly grim. So in some places, in other places, people have hope, but people are worried, especially in the lower levels of income, and so it makes this data, I think, even stronger. So, because on the next slide, slide 10, you'll see that 4-Hers in general are much more likely to be personally satisfied in life. So this is kind of the overarching view: 84% versus 70%. That's very significant. And if you go to the top box, very satisfied, it's even better, the 20-point difference between alums and non-alums. And we broke that out a little bit into kind of some general categories. On the next slide, if you go to social and emotional measures, you see across the board, whether it's their personal network of friends and family, their own family situation, their mental and emotional health, and connections with others in the community, there's significant differences between 4-H alums and non-alums. The one that really pops out for me is that connection. I think that's an attribute of the 4-H experience that's underutilized in our messaging, because these folks are really connected. You look at that 24 points difference with non-alums, and I think that sort of thing is responsible for a lot of the power of the experience, and I think shows up in their ability to be effective community organizers. So,
and this is Mark. And looking at that one, can we be safe in saying that the leadership skills that's built in that 4-H'er is a major contributor to what we see there?
I think overall, this kind of a survey, I say survey because it's not research in terms of how you all look at research. I don't think that you can say this happened because of that, but there's strong correlations.
Okay.
So correlation, yes. Causality, I don't think we can say that. Like a rich learner can say those things, but it kind of whets the appetite for that sort of data to be able to make that claim. But I mean, as you go through all this, it's not up and down. All this data is really, really solid. So I think there's a very strong correlation.
Yeah, Andy, I would always say that the high level of participation in community service and community engagement in 4-H might be what's causing some of those figures.
Okay, I certainly would agree. So on the next slide, let's go to financial. Here, and this is really positive as well. There's a even in today, when a lot of people are nervous about the future, and about their prospects. While there's high unemployment, there's still underemployment in the country. These numbers are really good. So whether it's their overall health, their specific job that they're in, or their opportunity, their potential to get a new job or secure something in the future, all those things, all those measures are very positive. And we're not talking about, this sample is not, it's not the 1%. It's not even the 20%. I mean, there are folks throughout the income level. So kind of across the board, you're looking at a certain level of confidence and happiness with their financial situation. So on the next slide, and I would suspect why is that they're fulfilled by their work. Not only is the work financially rewarding, but it's personally rewarding as well. So you can see 20-point difference in their opinion on whether they're making a difference, or whether they love their work, or even whether they have a good balance between work and home life. They're working in the fields that they studied for. So a huge majority of them say that 4-H impacted them succeeding in their working career. That last one is kind of a flip. It's the question is, I only work because I have to. So lower scores is more positive than higher score. A little bit different, just to explain that one. But again, a strong sense of optimism here. And based on values, I think very much based on values. And these kinds of questions, these ones right here on this slide, these are the kinds of questions that corporations across America are using to measure employee engagement. And employee engagement is a significant leading indicator for them on the quality of their staff, the productivity of their staff, et cetera. So I could guess with a reasonable amount of assurance that this would be very attractive. These kinds of numbers would be very attractive to those who are looking for workers. So if you, I would say to any HR person, if you want to raise your engagement score, hire some 4-Hers because they're serious about the work that they do. Any other questions so far? So my second takeaway, if you thought these numbers were good, the community involvement is even stronger. 4-H alums are strong community advocates. So that means they're more likely to donate, they're more likely to volunteer, they're more likely to be involved with faith or politics, and they support funding, even increased funding for public higher education. That's an important measure as well. So on the next slide, you can see some of the measures of how they're involved. They're confident in a leadership role by 20 points. They donate, they volunteer in the community regularly, they're actively involved in church, and they're politically active. So you can see some of those top ones. The difference is not only statistically significant, but is rather impressive. So, they're believers that they are making a difference and that they have purpose, and you can see how they define their purpose in terms of their citizenship. So, I don't think anyone would argue with the fact that we need more people like this in the country at this point, at this time. And then the next slide shows the numbers on higher ed. Overall, they are more educated than their parents. So if you're talking about economic mobility and education, especially higher ed being important to climb up that ladder, they have about a 10-point difference between themselves and non-alums. And most of them say that they're more educated than their parents. But those two measures on the left, they believe in public education, state colleges and universities as important to economic prosperity, and they are willing to support that with dollars. So I put that one in specifically for land grant presidents. I wanted them to see that. I suspected that might be the case, so very positive. So my last takeaway, number 3, is kind of about potential, really. Their allegiance to 4-H and their support for 4-H is very sticky. It remains throughout life. And as you can imagine, if they're still living in 4-H country and they were a career 4-H'er, it's even higher. So we use the Net Promoter Score to measure this. Net Promoter Score, if you're not familiar with it, is a measure that a lot of companies use to assess how strong their bond is with their customers, and they ask them if they would intend to come back and would recommend the company or the brand to those in their life. If you go to the next slide, you can see that we're at about 60, which is outstanding. So a good score. So here's how you measure it. On a scale of 1 to 10, you get a point if you're at a 9 or a 10. You get nothing if you're at a 7 or an 8, and you get a -1 if you're 6 or below. So it's a pretty robust measure of action. So neutrality does not help you. And in fact, it can hurt you. So most companies are, as I said, good is anything that's positive. But most companies are in the 30s, probably. Depending on the industry, the very elite companies and brands are over 80 or over 70 or over 80. I think the only thing that holds us back from getting up to there is just that it's a past purchase, quote unquote purchase for alums, so they're not going back for more potentially, or they're not seeing it. So I think this is a huge opportunity for us. Not only can we increase that score, but we can take some of that's really latent, positive purchase intent, if you will. Sorry, I'm in my old advertising days, but purchase intent really means that they would be willing to volunteer or to donate or to get involved in some way if they were asked and if they saw the program in their community. So very positive on this. So that's what I have on the study. So let me just stop here before I go on. Any questions on this work? And like I said, it will be available online. And I actually asked the research company today if they could look at that Harvard study and start to slice and dice ours to. In fact, they did a lot of that. They developed the question set so that it matched and mirrored and could be comparable to things like Pew and Gallup and other things that are out there about happiness and economic opportunities. So we're trying to kind of plug into some of the other things that the media is talking about.
Okay.
So then the next part that I'd like to go over, we then kind of talked a little bit more about other assets and how they line up against legislative priorities. So I just want to be clear here, these are Extension's legislative priorities. So we wanted to articulate them. These are the priorities set by ECOP and the ECOP Budget and Legislative Committee. And we have that chair on the line. So I wanted to ask John if he wanted to add anything about the next slide, which is the list of 3 priorities that we're supporting and that Extension is pursuing.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Just as a little bit of a background, as many of y'all will recall, last year the ECOP Budget and Ledge Committee developed a subcommittee of the ECOP Budget and Ledge Committee to really focus on 4-H advocacy. hopefully benefit not only 4-H, but of course, Extension as a whole. That group's met a number of times over this past year and the beginning of this year, with really 3 goals in mind. First, which are listed here on the slide, to increase capacity funds to grow 4-H and Extension as a whole, both in the way of 1890 Extension funding and also, of course, Smith-Lever funding. Secondly, to increase investments in funds that are outside of USDA and explore those opportunities for growth. And then thirdly, legal reform in Congress to solidify laws regarding name and emblem. I guess as an update that ties into the earlier comments by Martha, needing to increase our visibility of our impacts and to build upon some of these outstanding outcomes, Andy, that y'all's study has looked at, is we've recognized the need to come up with a common messaging tool for when our faculty and staff, and of course the 4-H and volunteers, are in DC. So a lot of synergy and energy has been spent over the past couple of months developing a one-pager with some common messaging bullet points that folks from across the nation can kind of focus on when we have opportunity to visit with our congressional delegation. Those points include 4-H, of course, being the largest youth development organization, is a program of the Cooperative Extension Service and land-grant universities. Secondly, 4-H is able to reach, nearly the 6 million young people with the support of the appropriations to 1890 Extension and Smith-Lever funding. And then finally, making sure that we emphasize that 4-H gives, our youth the ability to lead for a lifetime, and the 4-H programs really do focus on social and economic mobility for all kids, STEM education, workforce development, and positively affecting the health of all Americans. So that's kind of where we're at in that process right now, Andy.
Okay. So just a reminder, some of the next slides are really a reminder to all of us and kind of a codification of the assets that we have at a national level, because they are significant. The next slide, after this title slide, is a look at the brands that are represented by our board of trustees, and they're significant. Since we made that change to our board structure in partnership with ECOP and the section, we've had a lot of success in recruiting new trustees that are in the C-suite, and a lot of new CEOs to the board. So you can see the kind of brands that we have there, and you heard the passion of one of our trustees today. So we're very pleased. It's a great group. Personal giving has been exponentially higher since we made the change to the board, and really what we did a couple of years ago was just focus the board on fundraising, smaller number, and then establish a direct relationship with ECOP 4-H, a formal relationship with ECOP 4-H to keep ourselves aligned. And that so far is working extremely well. So that's just our board. On the next slide, you'll see an example or a smattering of our partners. So these are either donors who are supporting Extension financially, or marketing partners that are supporting us with in-kind or their own marketing assets. So also a good group and growing all the time. Jill Bramble and her team in resource development, and Artis Stevens in his team in marketing are doing a fantastic job in an integrated fashion to not only to serve these partners, be a good partner, but to attract new folks to the story. So it's looking good. So those are council assets. On the next slide, there are, we start to look at some of the extension assets that are here in town. We've got a lot of great 4-H alumni support on Capitol Hill. I mentioned that, you know, leveraging alumni, especially in the early stages of our strategy, leveraging high-powered alumni is extremely important to our success. So you can, you know, there's about 50 4-H alums in the House and Senate, lots more Hill staffers, and then there's also a formal 4-H caucus in the House that's co-chaired by these individuals in a bipartisan fashion. So council's role here is just to keep communications up, really our same role with any audience, which is to tell the story and hopefully put together those partnerships that benefit Extension directly. And then on the next slide, you know, it's a great time for 4-H boosters at USDA. Secretary Perdue has a long history with Georgia 4-H, and his grandchildren are in 4-H. So he's a great supporter. Deputy Secretary Sensky is actually a former program assistant here at National 4-H Council, and he's been here to speak to young people a number of times, and he's been a terrific ally there as well. Ted McKinney, the Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Affairs, is an alum, and then of course the NIFA director Scott Angle is now sitting on Council's Board of Trustees, so he's been fantastic. It's a great experience for all of our trustees to be able to have a relationship directly from Scott. And then finally, of course, we last and most important is the power of young people, and through the National 4-H Conference Center, where we do most of our convening for conference and CWF and other events, those young people, your young people, are visiting the Hill and making visits and connecting with lawmakers for the good of Extension and the good of 4-H. So another very powerful asset that we have. And then I just wanted to touch on, lastly, social media. Council is responsible for our national social media implementation. We have very good numbers here, both in our alumni database, which is growing as a result of our marketing programs, which are focused on acquiring names, and we share those with states. And then our social media footprint overall, right, primarily Facebook at this point, but growing. I think all these numbers have potential to grow, but even so, we're already we have the largest footprint of any youth development organization in the country. So that's always a way to connect with our supporters and connect with new supporters, whether they are advocates for health or for youth in general or civic engagement. It's a good way to grow our network. So that's just a quick overview and reminder of some of the assets that we have and what makes 4-H such a good investment, whether you are a corporate partner or an alumni, an individual alumni, or the federal government. It's a great investment to make. So.
Okay.
So that concludes my slides, and I'm happy to take questions or participate in discussion, or have you guys go back and forth in discussion.
Okay. And the you know, based on the relationship with ECOP's relationship, is there anything that you see where we need to not necessarily do differently, but enhance the direction in which we are going? what can we do? I know that the subcommittee and the goals and objectives, I know those, but is there anything that since we have innovated from across the system, any comments along those lines from your perspective?
Let's see, make sure. Yeah, I would say that communication is the key and the lowest cost way to accelerate the efforts of council and our efforts together. I think that there's a danger of of taking up too much air of the extension conversation, but I think there should be a consistent and sustained conversation about growth and investment in these programs. And I think that the best way is, ECOP 4-H has been fantastic, and I think and hope that it's still relatively early in its history. So, having those conversations at regional meetings on a regular basis, making sure that everybody is up to speed with what the committees are doing, what their roles are, what council's role is. I mean, all those things are, some of the changes that we made are relatively fresh. So again, I'm an ad guy, so, it doesn't sink in until it hits you 7 to 20 times. So, things that we do with our board, putting the demographics in front of them at every meeting, always starting our meetings with a refresh on what our strategy is and what our role in the system is. It has a very positive impact over time.
Okay, thank you. Any comment, John, along those lines, based on your experience?
Yeah, I think, Mark, that's been a real theme also with the, and I know Lila and Ed Jones are on, that are also on the ECOP 4-H leadership committee. So certainly defer to them too for some input. But from that committee's perspective, I think a lot of the conversation has been as a system, how are we going to move the needle from 6 million to 10 million by 2025 with that goal? And that's going to require that we look at things a little differently from potentially a volunteer base. How do we increase our reach to urban youth? How do we reach a more diversified youth and volunteer tier base? So as Andy said, I think that's going to require continual conversation, amongst the system and amongst the region. Ed and Lila, would you have some other comments to add to that? It's a great question.
This is Lila. The only thing I would add is the committee also, I think, readily recognizes the need for greater capacity. If we're going to increase enrollment, increase involvement in the 4-H program, we in extension need to have greater capacity within the system in order to do that.
And just to add to that, we have to be creative about that capacity, I think, and how we can make that happen.
Okay.
Yeah, just one thing that their comments stirred in me is that there is, the project, the Pathways 4-H Pathways project that was funded by a council trustee, Jim and Marcia Burrell, and Andy Turner, very ably led, really kind of pulled together all the elements of what it would take and focused on the need to be more customer centric, to build the program for the future around youth and families of today and tomorrow. So I think that has just started to get out there, and that's a significant change to go from a hierarchical system to one that's customer focused. Obviously, I come from a customer focused background, so that feels natural to me. But the land grant mission about broadcasting good technology and good information out doesn't always fit with that. So that's a really big, I think, strategic issue for the system to work through. And that group also, you know, I think very wisely offered up a very loose and customizable framework for change management. So I would really love to see that at the forefront of conversations among leadership groups. And then I also wanted to just thank Ed. Ed also is a trustee of National 4-H Council and represents ECOP 4-H on the board. He is fantastic. You all know he's fantastic. He's been a tremendous, his leadership has been tremendous in ensuring that we stay aligned and that everyone stays connected. So thank you, Ed, for all of your work.
Okay. Are there additional questions?
Andy, this is Lila again. Your comment about 1,500 kids who are involved with Citizenship Washington Focus and 300 in National 4-H Conference reminds me that I know when those kids are in Washington, D.C., they do spend some time on the Hill. And so my question is, who is it that develops the curriculum for those programs, and how might we affect that curriculum in a way that would help those young people be more effective in delivering a consistent message and delivering a professional message, if you will, to their members of Congress on the Hill while they're there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Citizen Washington Focus, we have an internal team that works with extension advisors to develop a curriculum and support those kids as they go up on the Hill. The National 4-H Conference has always been driven by folks at USDA. But I think that your point is well taken, and I think John's point earlier about how ECOP 4-H and that legislative group is going to develop some common language so that we have a true north on that everyone can use. I see that. I see those messages and that messaging strategy being central to doing exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Lila, this is John. But why we've got, a diverse group across the nation, I guess I'm interested too if there's opportunities for that common messaging within our own faculty. For example, opportunities at PILD and potentially Carrot and Oz. I guess be interested in other folks' thoughts from that standpoint.
Yeah, John, I think that's a really great idea, and we ought to look at ways to incorporate that message, both for consistency purposes and to make sure that it's delivered in the way that is most beneficial for all of us, and not only at the federal level, but I think too at the state and institution level, as we're talking with state legislators, county commissioners, city managers, and all of those local partners as well.
Okay. Thank you, Lila. Are there other questions? Terrence.
Yes, sir.
Oh, do we have any question in the chat box?
I believe Andy already answered those.
Andy has addressed them. Okay. Okay, then if Andy, Martha, and Andy, we want to once again thank you for your time and to engage in this discussion. It was very educational, and also I know from my perspective, I have made several notes which definitely would be beneficial to to me personally as well as to our continued ECOP conversation. John, thank you for your involvement in the discussion, and as was stated earlier, Ed, thank you for coordinating and also making this L4L happen this afternoon. And once again, thank everyone that joined us in this discussion this afternoon, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.